I was a home care nurse for a paralyzed man trapped in his own body, and I hated his son. Jeff visited once a week for exactly 1 hour. Cold, silent, barely acknowledging his father's existence. I thought he was a heartless monster waiting for his inheritance. Then I taught my patient to communicate by blinking, and he told me 5 words that left me speechless. Before we dive in, I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you love stories about hidden pain, complicated family relationships, and learning not to judge what we don't understand, please subscribe so you don't miss our next one. Now, let me take you back to that day. I became a home care nurse because I wanted to make a difference in people's lives during their most vulnerable moments. There's something sacred about caring for someone who can't care for themselves, about being the hands and voice for people who've lost those abilities. But nothing in my training prepared me for William Hartley. William was 68 years old and had been completely paralyzed for 8 months when I was assigned to his case. He suffered from what doctors call locked-in syndrome, a rare neurological condition that left him fully conscious and aware, but unable to move any part of his body except his eyes. A massive stroke had destroyed the part of his brain that controlled voluntary movement, but left his cognitive functions completely intact. Imagine being trapped inside your own body. You can see, hear, think, feel, but you can't speak, can't gesture, can't communicate in any conventional way. You're a prisoner in flesh that won't obey your commands. That was William's reality, and it was heartbreaking. I'd been working as his primary daytime nurse for 2 months, and I'd grown deeply attached to him. His eyes, pale blue, still sharp, would follow me around the room as I worked. I'd learned to read the subtle expressions there. Frustration when something was uncomfortable, gratitude when I adjusted his position, sadness that seemed to emanate from him in waves. I treated William like the person he still was. I talked to him constantly. About my day, about the weather, about the news, about anything and everything. I read him books, played classical music from his collection of vinyls, positioned him by the windows so he could watch the birds in the garden. I treated him with the dignity and respect he deserved. But his son was a different story. Jeff Hartley was 35 years old, and he visited his father every Thursday evening at exactly 6 p.m. He'd arrive in his expensive car, let himself in with his key, spend precisely 1 hour in his room, and then leave. And during that hour, nothing. Silence. Cold, empty silence. Jeff would walk into the room, say a perfunctory "hello, Dad," and then sit in the chair by the window. He'd pull out his phone or a newspaper, and he'd just sit there. Sometimes reading, sometimes scrolling, sometimes just staring out the window, rarely looking at his father, never talking to him beyond that initial greeting and a "goodbye, I'll see you next week" as he left. I hated him for it. Here was William, trapped in a body that wouldn't respond, desperate for connection, for communication, for any sign that he still mattered to the people he loved, and his only son couldn't even be bothered to have a one-sided conversation with him. "Your father can hear you, you know," I'd told Jeff after the 3rd or 4th visit I'd witnessed. "He's still in there. He's still aware. He'd probably love to hear about your week, about your life." Jeff had looked at me with dark, tired eyes and said simply, "I'm here, aren't I? That's what matters." Then he'd returned to his newspaper, effectively dismissing me. I'd walked away from that interaction fuming. What kind of heartless person visits their paralyzed father and can't even talk to him? What kind of son fulfills the bare minimum obligation, showing up, while withholding any actual emotional presence? The more I watched Jeff's visits, the more I judged him. He was clearly wealthy. The expensive suits, the luxury car, the designer watch. He was obviously successful. He had the resources to hire the best care for his father, which I appreciated professionally. But he couldn't spare emotional resources, couldn't give his father the gift of his voice, his stories, his presence. It made me angry on William's behalf. This man had raised a son, and this was the thanks he got? Cold, silent visits from someone who acted like he'd rather be anywhere else? I started leaving the room during Jeff's visits. I couldn't stand to watch the silence, the emotional absence. I'd find tasks to do elsewhere in the house, returning only when I heard Jeff leaving. My colleague Diane, an evening nurse who occasionally covered my shifts, had a different perspective. Maybe he's grieving, she suggested one day when I was venting about Jeff. Maybe seeing his father like this is too painful, and silence is all he can manage. Then why come at all? I argued. If it's too painful, hire someone to check on his father. Don't show up and act like you're doing some kind of noble duty while giving nothing of yourself. Maybe showing up is all he has to give, Diane had said quietly. But I hadn't wanted to hear it. I'd built my understanding of Jeff based on what I could see. A cold, distant man who couldn't be bothered to connect with his dying father. I had no idea how wrong I was. Everything changed when I learned about communication boards for locked-in syndrome patients. I've been researching constantly, trying to find any way to help William communicate, to give him some agency in his own care, some way to express his needs and thoughts. That's when I discovered that some locked-in patients, with practice, could learn to deliberately blink in response to questions. It was painstaking. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no, going through the alphabet to spell out words. It could take hours to spell out a single sentence, but it was communication. It was a window into the prison of William's consciousness. I brought the materials to show William's doctor during his next checkup. Dr. Rouse was cautiously optimistic. Mr. Hartley's cognitive function is completely intact, and I've observed deliberate eye movement. He's tracking people and objects. There's no reason he couldn't learn this system, though it will require patience from everyone involved. I was thrilled. I spent the next week working with William, establishing the system. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. When I'd go through the alphabet, he'd blink once when I reached the letter he wanted. The first few sessions were frustrating. William's motor control was impaired, and sometimes his blinks were ambiguous. Was that a single deliberate blink or just a natural eye movement? But gradually, we developed a rhythm. I learned to wait, to watch carefully, to distinguish between intentional communication and reflexive movement. After 2 weeks of practice, William successfully spelled his first word. Thank you. I cried. Right there in front of him, I dissolved into tears because after 8 months of being locked in silence, William Hartley had a voice again. You're welcome, I told him, wiping my eyes. We're going to do this, William. We're going to let you talk again. Is there something you want to tell me? 1 blink. Yes. Okay, let's go through the alphabet. What followed was the most painstaking hour of my nursing career. Letter by letter, blink by blink, William spelled out a message. I wrote each letter on a pad as we went, and slowly a sentence emerged. J-E-F-F. I paused, surprised. He wanted to talk about his son. S-A-C-R-I-F-I-C-E-D. My pen slowed. Where was this going? E-V-E-R-Y-T-H-I-N-G. I looked up at William, confused. F-O-R. Another pause. M-E. Jeff sacrificed everything for me. I stared at the words I'd written. I don't understand, William. What do you mean? Over the next several sessions, because communication at this pace was exhausting for William, a story emerged. A story that completely shattered my understanding of Jeff Hartley. William had not been a good father. That was his second message, spelled out with what I could only interpret as shame in his eyes. I was cruel to Jeff. Slowly, painfully, over hours of careful communication, William told me about the father he'd been. Domineering, critical, emotionally abusive. A successful businessman who saw his sensitive, artistic son as a disappointment. I told him he was worthless, William spelled out, and I saw what looked like tears forming in his eyes, one of the few bodily functions he could still produce involuntarily. Jeff had wanted to be an architect, to study art and design. William had wanted him to go into business, to take over the family company. When Jeff had defied him and enrolled in architecture school, William had cut off his college funding. Jeff had finished his degree, working 3 jobs, taking 8 years to complete a 4-year program. I disowned him, William continued, told him he was dead to me. For 15 years, William and Jeff had barely spoken. Jeff had moved to Seattle, built a successful architecture firm, gotten engaged to a woman named Sarah whom he loved deeply. He'd created a life completely separate from his toxic father, a life where he could finally breathe. Then came the stroke. William's wife had died 20 years earlier. He had no other children, no siblings, no close friends. When he was hospitalized, when the diagnosis came back as locked-in syndrome requiring full-time care, there was only one person to call: Jeff. The son he'd disowned, the son he'd told was worthless, the son he'd spent 35 years tearing down. And Jeff had come. Quit his job. Moved back. Fiancé broke up. I felt my stomach drop. Jeff gave up his career, his relationship. One blink. Yes. For you? One blink. Pays. My. Care. House. His. Savings. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. All this time, I'd seen a cold, distant son. I'd never known I was seeing a traumatized man forcing himself to show up for a father who'd never shown up for him. Why does he come, William, after everything you did to him? The next message took almost an hour to spell out, with breaks for William to rest. Better. Man. Then. I don't deserve him. He comes anyway. I thought about Jeff's silent visits with new understanding. The tension I'd noticed in his shoulders, the way his hands sometimes shook slightly when he entered the room, the physical distance he maintained from his father's bed. Those weren't signs of indifference. They were signs of trauma, of a man doing something incredibly difficult, something that probably triggered decades of painful memories, because it was the right thing to do. The newspaper reading wasn't coldness, it was a coping mechanism. William, I said slowly, does Jeff know you can communicate now? 2 blinks. No. Would you like him to know? William's eyes held mine for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, 1 blink. Yes. That Thursday, I made sure to be present during Jeff's visit. I was nervous, unsure how to approach this man I'd so thoroughly misjudged. Jeff arrived at exactly 6 p.m., as always. He walked into William's room, his face carefully neutral. "Hello, Dad," he said quietly, then moved to his usual chair by the window. "Jeff, can I talk to you for a moment?" He looked surprised. We'd barely interacted beyond my judgmental comments about his lack of communication with his father. "What is it?" His voice was guarded. "Your father has learned to communicate." Jeff's entire body went rigid. "What?" I explained the blinking system, demonstrated it briefly. Jeff watched with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between hope and terror. "He's been spelling out messages. He's been telling me about his past, about the father he was to you." Jeff's jaw tightened. "He told you about that?" "He wanted me to understand you. He wanted me to understand you." Why? Jeff's voice was harsh. What does it matter what you think of me? Because I've been unfair to you. Because I judged you without understanding. Because I felt my face flush with shame. I thought you were cold, heartless. I didn't know. Jeff laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Didn't know what? That I'm a doormat? That I gave up everything for a man who spent my entire childhood telling me I was worthless? That I broke my engagement, destroyed my career, and emptied my savings account to take care of someone who disowned me multiple times? I didn't know you're the strongest person I've ever met. Jeff looked at me sharply. I didn't know, I continued, that you were showing up every single week to sit with your father despite decades of mistreatment. That you were paying for his care even though it's bankrupted you. That you were doing the right thing even though he never did right by you. That's not being a doormat, Jeff. That's being a better person than most of us could ever hope to be. Jeff's eyes were glistening now. I don't come because I've forgiven him. I haven't. I don't come because we have a good relationship. We don't. I come because he's my father and he has no one else, and I couldn't live with myself if I abandoned him the way he abandoned me. He knows that, and he wants to tell you something. Jeff looked at his father for the first time since entering the room. Really looked at him. What could he possibly have to say to me now? Why don't you ask him? What followed was one of the most emotionally raw hours I've ever witnessed. I stayed in the room facilitating the communication as Jeff asked his first tentative question. Dad, can you really understand me? One blink. Yes. Do you remember what you said to me when I told you I wanted to study architecture? One blink. Do you remember disowning me? One blink. And this time, I could clearly see tears rolling down William's paralyzed face. Jeff's voice broke. Then why did you hate me so much? It took 40 minutes for William to spell out his answer. I didn't hate you. I hated you were brave. Followed, dream. I never was. I wanted, be, pilot. Father told me same. I obeyed. I resented you stronger. Jeff sat stunned, processing this revelation about his father's own crushed dreams. I'm sorry, William spelled next. You deserved better, Father. Love, support. You got cruelty. I'm sorry. So sorry. Jeff was crying openly now. I needed to hear you say that. For 35 years, I needed to hear you say that. I know. Sorry you had to sacrifice life. I didn't sacrifice my life, Jeff said, his voice thick with emotion. I put it on hold. For you. Because you're my father. And despite everything, I couldn't just let you die alone. You should. I deserved it. Maybe, but that's not who I am. I show up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Thank you for being better man than me. Over the following weeks, Jeff's visits changed. He started coming twice a week, staying longer. He'd bring photos from his architecture portfolio, showing his father the buildings he designed in Seattle. He'd talk about Sarah, about the life he'd built and lost, and William would listen, blinking out responses, apologies, and slowly, painfully slowly, beginning to know his son as a person rather than a disappointment. One evening, I found Jeff standing in the hallway outside William's room, his shoulders shaking with sobs. He told me he's proud of me, Jeff said when he could speak. He said, proud of the man you became despite me. I've waited my entire life to hear my father say he's proud of me. I'm sorry you had to wait so long. I'm not, Jeff said. wiping his eyes. If he'd said it before the stroke, when he could still talk normally, I wouldn't have believed him. I would have thought he was just saying it. But this, spelling it out letter by letter, taking an hour to tell me he's proud of me, that's real. That took effort. That took him really meaning it. 6 months after William learned to communicate, something unexpected happened. Jeff showed up for his Thursday visit with someone else, a woman I'd never met, about Jeff's age, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Nina, this is Sarah." I understood immediately. "You got back together." Sarah smiled. "We never really stopped loving each other. We both needed to figure some things out. Jeff needed to understand that caring for his father didn't make him a victim, and I needed to understand that this was something he had to do. "We're engaged again," Jeff said, showing me the ring on Sarah's finger. "We're getting married next month, small ceremony, and we were hoping Dad could attend. Virtually, at least. We could set up a video call so he could watch." I looked at Jeff, this man I'd so thoroughly misjudged, and felt overwhelmed with respect for him. He'd been hurt by his father for decades, and yet here he was, wanting to include him in his wedding. That wasn't weakness. That wasn't being a doormat. That was radical grace. "I think William would love that," I said. On the day of Jeff and Sarah's wedding, I helped position William so he could see the laptop screen clearly. The ceremony was small, just a handful of people in a garden somewhere with an officiant and simple vows. But it was beautiful. When Jeff and Sarah exchanged their vows, I watched William's eyes, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Pure, uncomplicated joy. And when the ceremony ended, when Jeff and Sarah kissed as husband and wife, William blinked out a message he'd asked me to prepare in advance. I read it aloud to Jeff over the video connection. "Thank you for letting me be part of your day. You deserved a better father for your wedding, but I'm grateful you let this father see you find happiness. I love you, son. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry." Jeff was crying too hard to respond verbally. He just nodded at the camera, hand over his heart. William Hartley died 4 months later, peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral, Jeff gave a eulogy that was honest in a way most eulogies aren't. "My father was not a good man for most of his life," Jeff said to the small gathering. "He was cruel. He was demanding. He crushed dreams and relationships with equal efficiency. For most of my life, I hated him." He paused, collecting himself. But in his final year, trapped in a body that wouldn't move, forced to confront the man he'd been, my father did something remarkable. He apologized. Not with words, he didn't have words, but letter by letter, blink by blink, he told me the truth about himself, about his own failures, his own crushed dreams, his own pain that he'd inflicted on others. He taught me something in his final year that he never taught me in the previous 35, that it's never too late to acknowledge your mistakes, that even when you can't undo the damage you've done, you can at least witness it honestly, and that sometimes the people we hurt the most are the ones we love because we see our own failures reflected in them. After the funeral, Jeff approached me. "Thank you," he said, "for everything you did for my dad, for teaching him to communicate, for giving us that last year together. I should be thanking you for teaching me not to judge what I don't understand, for showing me that strength isn't about being unaffected. It's about showing up even when you're deeply affected. You were the best son your father could have hoped for, even though he spent most of his life not deserving you." Jeff smiled sadly. I deserved better than the father he was, but in the end, he became something else. Not a good father, it was too late for that, but an honest one, and that meant something. 5 years have passed since William's death. Jeff and Sarah are still married, still happy. Jeff rebuilt his architecture career, starting smaller but building steadily. They visit me sometimes, bringing their daughter, a 2-year-old named Willow, who has her father's sensitive eyes. We named her after my dad, not William because that felt too heavy, but Willow, something that bends but doesn't break. That's what I learned in those final months with him, that even people who've been rigid and broken their whole lives can bend, can grow, can acknowledge their mistakes, even when it's too late to fix them. I think about William often, about the lessons I learned caring for him, about how I judged Jeff so harshly, so completely without understanding the weight he was carrying, about how silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's survival, about how showing up can be the hardest, bravest thing we do, especially when we're showing up for people who hurt us. I learned that caregiving isn't just about physical care. It's about understanding that everyone we meet is carrying invisible wounds, fighting invisible battles, that the coldest exterior might be protecting the most damaged heart, that what looks like indifference might actually be someone trying desperately not to fall completely apart. Jeff taught me all of that, not through words, but through his weekly visits, his silent presence, his radical choice to care for someone who'd never really cared for him. And William taught me that it's never too late for honesty, that even when you can't move, can't speak, can't undo the damage of a lifetime, you can still blink out the truth, letter by letter, one acknowledgement at a time. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give isn't forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes it's just witness, seeing people clearly, not as we assume they are, but as they actually are. Understanding that monsters are rarely as monstrous as we imagine, and heroes are rarely as heroic. We're all just complicated people doing the best we can with the damage we've been dealt. And sometimes the most profound healing happens not through grand gestures or perfect apologies, but through one person showing up, week after week, despite everything, saying through their presence what words can never quite capture. I see you. I acknowledge what you did to me, and I'm here anyway. Not because you deserve it, but because this is who I choose to be. That was Jeff's gift to his father, and, inadvertently, to me. A lesson in grace I'll carry for the rest of my nursing career, for the rest of my life. What did you think of Jeff's choice to care for his father despite decades of abuse? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story about hidden pain, complicated forgiveness, and not judging what we don't understand touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more meaningful stories every day. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss our next thought-provoking tale. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.